The first shot missed her ear by 2 inches. Harriet didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply shifted her weight to her left foot, tightened her grip on the steel breaker bar, and looked at the man who fired it like he had just made the worst decision of his entire life. And he had. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or written off by the world, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Harriet Lawson decided to stop being invisible started the same way every other night had started for the past 6 years, with her feet hurting and nobody caring. She had been on shift since 4 in the afternoon. It was now 11:15 at night, the kind of hour when Chicago stops pretending to be civilized and just becomes itself. Cold, loud, indifferent. The kind of city that chews through people quietly without apology and spits out whatever it doesn't need. Richie's 24-hour diner sat on the corner of a block that city planners had forgotten and criminals had remembered. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered. The R had been broken for 3 years, and nobody had fixed it, so it just read Itchy's now, which Harriet privately thought was more honest anyway. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease, and something indefinably human, like the accumulated sighs of 1,000 tired people who had come here looking for warmth and settled for pie. Harriet moved between the tables with the kind of practiced efficiency that people mistake for slowness. She was a big woman, 320 pounds wide-shouldered, deliberate in every step she took. She wore a faded blue uniform that strained at the buttons and sensible shoes that had long since stopped being comfortable. Her hair was pulled back tight. She kept her face neutral. That was the trick she had learned early: keep your face so still that people look right through you. And they did. Every single night. They looked right through her. "Hattie!" That was Tommy, the short-order cook, calling from behind the window. "Table 4 wants decaf, but asked for regular. What do I do?" "Give them regular," she said without looking up from the coffee she was refilling. "They won't know the difference at this hour, and they'll sleep better thinking they made a healthy choice." Tommy laughed. He was the only one who laughed at her jokes. She appreciated that about him. She moved through her section booths, 3 through 7, the back half of the diner, the less desirable territory where the lighting was dimmer and the vinyl on the seats had cracked years ago. This was her domain. She had claimed it without asking and kept it without fighting. Nobody wanted it anyway. Booth 6 held the man she thought of privately as the regular. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday night, always between 10:30 and 11. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee, no sugar, and a slice of cherry pie, which he ate slowly, like a man who had very few pleasures left and intended to stretch the ones he had. He wore expensive clothes that he wore casually, like a man who had been rich long enough that money had stopped meaning anything to him. He had heavy hands and a face that looked like it had been broken at least twice and healed crooked both times. His name she knew, because you learned things in a diner if you kept your ears open and your mouth shut, was Dominic Santoro. She knew what he was. Chicago wasn't a big city in the ways that mattered. Whispers traveled. She had heard the whispers about Dominic Santoro for years before she ever saw his face. He ran the docks. He had arrangements with people who moved things that shouldn't be moved. He had a reputation that made men cross the street to avoid walking in his shadow. He had also, in 6 years of coming to her section, never once been anything but decent to her. Not kind exactly. Dominic Santoro did not strike her as a man who did kindness easily, but decent. He said please when he ordered. He said thank you when she refilled his coffee. He tipped not extravagantly, not in the way men tip when they want something just fairly, the way a person tips when they understand that somebody did a job and deserves to be compensated for it. Once, about 3 years ago, a drunk at the counter had made a comment about her weight. A mean comment. The kind that was meant to carry across the room, and it did. Harriet had kept her face still and kept moving, but Dominic from booth 6 had turned around slowly and looked at the drunk with an expression she couldn't fully see from her angle, and the drunk had stopped talking and stared at his coffee and never come back to the diner again. Dominic never mentioned it, neither did she. But she remembered. That was the thing about being invisible. You noticed everything, you cataloged everything, you stored it away in some interior space that nobody knew you had, and it sat there organized and waiting like ammunition in a magazine. At 11:22, Dominic looked up from his pie and caught her eye as she came to refill his coffee. "How's the night?" he asked. He always asked. "Long," she said. She always said. He nodded like that was a complete and sufficient answer, which she respected. She was turning to go back to the counter when she saw the black SUV pull into the lot across the street. She noticed it the way she noticed most things peripherally, without appearing to look directly. A reflex so old it had become instinct. The SUV was a late-model Escalade dark-tinted windows, no visible plate light. It moved slowly into the lot adjacent to the parking garage, the one connected to the office building that shared the block with the diner. It parked at an angle that wasn't quite a parking space, pointed toward the exit, ready to leave fast. She refilled the coffee at table 4 without looking at it and moved back toward the counter. Her eyes went to the garage entrance, then to the SUV, then to the street. A second vehicle, a dark sedan, had pulled up on the far side of the block. She felt something shift in her chest. Something old, something she had worked very hard to suffocate under 6 years of decaf and cherry pie and invisible nights. She recognized it the way you recognize a song you haven't heard since you were young. Threat assessment. Her brain had clicked into a mode she had promised herself she was done with. It was doing it anyway. Her hands were steady, her breathing had slowed. Her perception of the space around her had widened automatically, taking in angles and exits and the weight of objects within reach. There were 6 men. She counted them as they exited both vehicles with the practiced calm of someone who had been trained to count threats the way other people count sheep. They moved in a pattern that was too coordinated to be coincidental, spread apart just enough that they couldn't be surrounded, but close enough to close a gap instantly. 1 man anchored the garage entrance, 2 moved to cover the side exits, 3 moved inside. Tactical deployment, professional spacing. These were not amateurs. She recognized the man in front, Declan O'Bannon. The recognition hit her like cold water. She knew that face. She had seen it in a different context, in a different life, attached to a name that appeared in briefing documents she was not supposed to have read, and had read anyway because she had always believed that knowing more than you were supposed to know was the only real advantage a person could carry through a dangerous world. Declan O'Bannon was Irish Syndicate, one of their best. The kind of man who didn't appear unless something needed to be finished with no loose ends and no noise. He was not here for a conversation, and Dominic Santoro was in booth 6 eating cherry pie, completely unaware that 6 professional killers had just surrounded the building he was about to walk out of. Harriet set down the coffee pot. She looked at booth 6. She looked at the garage. She thought about walking to the back and calling Tommy over and pretending she hadn't seen anything, which was the smart thing. The safe thing. The thing that a woman who had spent 6 years carefully maintaining her invisibility should absolutely do. Then she thought about her husband. Marcus Lawson had been dead for 6 years, 2 months and 11 days. She knew the count the way she knew her own heartbeat, without trying, without thinking about it, just as an ongoing fact of being alive. He had died in a failed extraction mission in a country whose name she still could not say out loud without her throat closing. He had died because someone had sold the operation. Someone had taken money and traded it for the lives of 4 operators, including the one she had loved since she was 23 years old. She had never found out who. She had come very close twice. Both times the trail had gone cold in the same place, a name that kept surfacing in the margins of too many things. The Volkov Syndicate. Russian arms traffickers with deep roots in Chicago's underworld, a network so embedded in the city's infrastructure that finding them meant going somewhere that law enforcement couldn't follow. She had not found a way in. For 6 years she had not found a way in. She looked at booth 6 again. Dominic Santoro had connections that went everywhere. He knew things. He had access to people and information and the kind of leverage that only existed in the world she was trying to reach. She had not chosen this diner entirely by accident. She had not chosen this section entirely by accident. She had spent 6 years building proximity to a man who might someday represent a door she could walk through. She had never planned on this. She had never planned on 6 professional killers showing up and forcing her hand before she was ready. But here they were, and here she was. And there was Dominic Santoro setting down his fork, folding his napkin, reaching for his wallet, the way he always did at the end of the night, preparing to walk into a parking garage full of men who had been paid to make sure he never walked out. She made the decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Not because it was strategic, not because she had calculated the odds, not because she was ready or prepared or emotionally equipped to do what she was about to do. She made the decision because the man in booth 6 had once silenced a drunk who mocked her and never once mentioned it, and in 6 years of being invisible, that small ordinary act of human decency was among the rarest things she had witnessed. You don't let a person like that die in a parking garage. Not when you're the only one who can stop it. She moved toward the equipment closet at the back of the kitchen, passing Tommy without a word. "Hattie," Tommy said, "where are you?" "Covering someone's smoke break," she said, which made no sense at all. But Tommy was already back at the grill and not the kind of person who pushed. The equipment closet smelled like motor oil and old cleaning supplies. She found what she was looking for without having to search a steel breaker bar, 18 inches solid, the kind used to pry open equipment and lift heavy plates. She had known it was there because she knew where everything was. She always knew where everything was. She held it in her right hand. It was heavy. It was real. It had been a very long time since she had held anything with the specific intention she was holding this. Her hands were not shaking. She was mildly surprised. She had expected them to shake. She stepped out of the back exit into the cold night air and moved toward the parking garage with the deliberate, unhurried efficiency of a woman who has all the time in the world and is simply choosing to use it right now. The sounds from inside the garage reached her before she reached the entrance. Men's voices. Low, professional, not loud, the kind of voices that didn't need volume because the situation was already controlled. A thud of something heavy against concrete. A grunt of pain that was cut off quickly, the sound of a man who understood that making noise was not going to help him. Dominic Santoro's voice rough and completely without fear. "You think Callahan sent 6 men because he respects me. He sent 6 men because he's afraid of what happens if one of you fails." A laugh. Cold. Declan O'Bannon's voice, she recognized its flat, Dublin-edged cadence. "Nobody's failing tonight, Dominic. This is just business." "Everything is just business until it isn't." "Smart till the end. I'll give you that." She entered the garage. The light inside was bad fluorescent tubes that flickered at intervals, casting everything in a yellow-gray wash that made people look like versions of themselves. She saw them before they saw her. Dominic on his knees between 2 parked cars, blood at his temple jacket torn. 3 men visible in front of him, 2 more stationed near the exits, Declan, standing apart with the particular stillness of a man who has done this enough times that he no longer needs to be close to feel in control. She kept walking, steady, unhurried. It was the nearest man who saw her first. He turned, looked at her, and something crossed his face that was almost funny because it was not alarm. It was confusion, then mild amusement. "The hell is this?" he said. The other men looked. Declan looked. Dominic, through the blood in his eye, looked. "Lady," the nearest man said with the particular condescension of a person who has never had cause to be afraid of what he's looking at. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to turn around and walk back to wherever you came from." Harriet stopped walking. She looked at the man. She looked at the breaker bar in her hand. She looked back at the man. "No," she said, not defiantly, not dramatically, just factually, the way you say no to something that isn't a real question. The man looked at his colleague and laughed. Actually laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from genuine disbelief. "Did she just—" "Put the bar down," Declan said from across the garage. His voice was patient. He was already recalculating, not because he was frightened, but because an unknown variable had entered his scene, and he was the kind of professional who handled unknown variables by removing them efficiently. He raised his weapon. "This isn't your business. Walk away, and I promise you go home tonight." Harriet looked at him. She thought about Marcus. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the fact that she was 47 years old and her feet hurt, and she was standing in a parking garage holding an 18-inch steel bar, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation of how her life was supposed to go, this was exactly where she was supposed to be. "You won't shoot me," she said. Declan tilted his head. "Why not?" "Because you don't know who I am yet," she said. "And something in the back of your brain is telling you that maybe you should find out before you do something you can't take back." Silence. 4 seconds of complete silence in the garage, which is a very long time when 6 men are holding weapons and 1 woman is holding a steel bar and a dying Mafia boss is watching from the floor. "She's bluffing," one of the men said. "Probably," Declan agreed. He fired, and Harriet Lawson, who had not moved like this in 6 years, dropped her left shoulder and shifted her center of gravity in one motion that had been trained into her body so deeply that 6 years of waitressing had not touched it, and the shot went past her ear close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Then she moved. And the night inside that parking garage changed completely. The first man came at her fast, the one who had laughed. She let him come, absorbed his forward momentum against her right hip, redirected it with a technique she had taught to Special Forces operators in a different decade of her life, and put his face into the door of a Honda Civic with enough force to leave a dent. He dropped like his strings had been cut. The second man adjusted his approach, and she was already turning the breaker bar, coming in a short, controlled arc that hit his right knee at precisely the angle required to take the joint in the wrong direction. The sound he made was not a scream. It was something more honest than a scream, a raw, involuntary sound of a body registering damage, and he went down and did not get back up. "What?" somebody said. "Move on her," Declan ordered, and his voice had shifted slightly. Not afraid, she did not think Declan O'Bannon had been afraid of many things, but recalibrated. He was looking at her differently now. He was trying to figure out what he was looking at. She didn't give him time. She kept moving because the thing about close-quarters combat that most people who haven't trained in it don't understand is that stopping is how you die. Movement is life. Unpredictability is armor. She moved through the garage like she had a map of it that nobody else could see, which in a sense she did. She had been mapping it in her head since the moment she walked in. Every vehicle, a potential barrier or weapon or cover, every angle already calculated. The third man was between her and Dominic. She needed him down. She put him down in 11 seconds using the Civic's side mirror as an intermediate weapon, in a sequence that would have been difficult to explain to someone who hadn't spent years teaching it. She got to Dominic. He was looking up at her with an expression she would think about later. A man who had spent 30 years in organized crime, who had looked into the eyes of people who wanted to kill him more times than he could count, looking at a woman in a diner uniform holding a steel bar and not understanding a single thing he was seeing. "Can you stand?" she said. Yeah, I think." His voice was rougher than usual. He had a cut above his eye that needed attention. 2 ribs she assessed quickly, probably cracked. "Stand up and get behind that column," she said. "Don't come out until I tell you." "Who are you?" he said. "Right now." She was already turning back toward Declan and the remaining men. "I'm the woman keeping you alive. We can do the introductions after." He stood. He moved to the column. She noticed despite everything that he did it without argument, and she noted that as data. A man who could take direction under pressure. Useful. 3 men remained. Declan O'Bannon stood at the center of them, and he was no longer looking at her like a variable. He was looking at her like a problem, a serious one. "Stop," he said. She stopped, not because he told her to, because she chose to, and the distinction mattered enormously. She stood in the middle of the garage, breathing harder than she would have liked, because 6 years behind a counter was not the same as 6 years of training. Her body had remembered the skills, but it was making her pay for the time she had spent not using them, and she looked at Declan O'Bannon across the space between them. "3 of your men are down," she said. "The job is already compromised. You can finish this or you can walk away, but I need you to understand something before you decide." "What's that?" His voice was completely controlled. She respected that professionally. He was frightened, and he was not showing it, and that was discipline. "I've been waiting 6 years for a reason to do this," she said. "You're giving me one. I'm not tired. I'm not scared. And I have nothing left to lose that I haven't already lost." She let that land for a moment. "Can you say the same?" Declan looked at her for a long moment. "You're military," he said. It was not a question. "Was?" she said. "What changed?" "Someone took something from me," she said. And tonight is the beginning of me taking it back." The garage went quiet again. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Dominic Santoro's breathing steady, waiting, a man who had learned to be patient with violence. Declan O'Bannon made his decision, and the last thing Harriet Lawson felt before the next 40 seconds erased everything she thought she remembered about who she had become was the strange, clean clarity of a person who has finally, after a very long time, stopped pretending to be someone she was not. She was not a waitress. She had never really been a waitress. She was what 6 years of grief and hiding and cherry pie and invisible nights had not managed to bury, no matter how deep she had tried to put it. She was the thing that happened when the world pushed someone past the point where pretending was worth the effort anymore. The breaker bar came up, and Harriet Lawson went back to work. The 40 seconds were not clean. Nobody who has ever been in a real fight will tell you they are. The movies lie about that they make it look choreographed and graceful, like the violence has rhythm and the rhythm has beauty. Real violence is ugly and fast and painful, and the person who wins is usually not the person who is strongest or most skilled, but the person who can keep thinking clearly while their body is screaming at them to stop. Harriet could keep thinking clearly. That had always been her gift. Even when her shoulder hit the door of a parked car hard enough to send white light across her vision, she was already calculating angle distance, the position of Declan's feet relative to hers, how much weight he was putting on his left leg versus his right. The shoulder hurt. She filed it away. Pain was information. Information was useful. Everything else was noise. The man who came at her first was the one she had been watching, the younger one heavier, who moved with the specific confidence of someone who had won a lot of fights and had not yet lost one badly enough to teach him what winning wasn't. He led with his right. She had known he would. She stepped into it instead of away from it, which confused him for the half second she needed. And she put the crown of her skull into the bridge of his nose with a force that was not elegant, but was extremely effective. He sat down on the concrete and did not get back up. Declan was better. She had known he would be. He didn't rush. He didn't come at her with emotion, which was the mistake most men made. They let anger accelerate them past their own skill. And that gap between anger and ability was where trained fighters lived. Declan was controlled. He moved with her, not at her, mirroring her shifts in position, looking for the opening. "You trained Krav," he said. He wasn't breathing hard. He was talking to stay calm. She recognized the technique because she had taught it. "Among other things," she said. "Who taught you in Fort Bragg?" she said. "And then I taught myself." Something changed in his face. Fractional. But she had spent years learning to read what people didn't want to show, and what she read in Declan O'Bannon's face in that moment was the specific recalibration of a man who has just realized that the situation he is in is significantly worse than he thought it was 3 minutes ago. "Fort Bragg," he repeated. "The woman who trained half your government's special operations people is standing in front of you with a steel bar," she said. "And you have one man left who can still walk. I need you to think very carefully about the next 30 seconds of your life." The last standing man, younger, wiry, positioned to Declan's right, made the mistake of looking at Declan for direction. That half second of inattention was enough. Harriet moved before he looked back, and the breaker bar connected with his weapon hand at a point that made further holding of that weapon anatomically impossible. He made a sound and the gun skittered across the concrete, and she put her foot on it without looking down. That left Declan. Just Declan in the middle of the garage with 5 men down around him and a waitress standing 10 feet away holding a steel bar and breathing harder than she would have preferred, but not as hard as she had feared. "This is where you make the smart choice," she said. Declan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the men on the ground. Then he looked back at her. And something happened in his expression that she had not expected. Not surrender exactly, because Declan O'Bannon was not the kind of man who surrendered, but a kind of acknowledgement, a professional recognizing something worth acknowledging. "What do you want?" he said. "Tonight, for you to leave here and tell Callahan that Santoro is alive and that the 6 men he sent to fix that situation are not." "He won't accept that." "I know," she said. "That's the point." Declan was quiet for a moment. "You want him to send more." "I want him to make noise," she said. noise I can follow back to a quieter place. He studied her for another long moment. She let him. She was hurting. The shoulder was going to be bad tomorrow, and there was a cut on her left forearm she hadn't felt happen but could feel now, but she stood completely still and let him look because stillness was its own kind of language, and what she was saying with it was, "I can stand here as long as this takes." "You're not after Santoro," Declan said slowly. "No." "Then what are you after?" "Something older than this," she said. "Something that doesn't have anything to do with you or Callahan or whatever this dock war is about." He looked at her differently then, not with fear she didn't think she would ever fully frighten Declan O'Bannon, which was a kind of respect she could appreciate, but with the particular attention of a man who has just encountered something he doesn't have a category for. "I'm going to find out who you are," he said. "I know," she said. "When you do, you'll understand why that's not good news for you." He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the garage exit, stepping over one of his fallen men without looking down, with the composure of a person who had long since made peace with the fact that the world was brutal, and the best you could do was be more brutal than the world before it was more brutal than you. He stopped at the edge of the light. "The shoulder," he said without turning around. "Ice it for 20 minutes, then heat. The bruising will be bad either way, but the heat after will keep the muscle from locking." She said nothing. He walked out into the dark, and she stood there for a moment, in the silence of the garage with 5 men down around her, and Dominic Santoro watching from behind a concrete column, and she let herself feel just for a moment, just long enough to acknowledge it, the sheer overwhelming strangeness of being exactly who she was, in exactly this place, doing exactly this thing. Then she turned toward the column. "You can come out now," she said. Dominic Santoro stepped out from behind the column, and she reassessed him the way she always reassessed people after she had seen them in a crisis situation, because crisis was the truest information about a person you could have. He was hurt, but he was upright. His face was set in a particular expression. She recognized the face of a man who has spent a lifetime in control of his environment, encountering something completely outside his control, and trying to decide what to do about that. He looked at the 5 men on the ground. He looked at her. He looked at the gun under her foot. "Who are you?" he said. It was the same question he had asked 10 minutes ago when the fight was still beginning, but it meant something different now. "My name is Harriet Lawson," she said. "I have been your waitress for 6 years. He stared at her. "I know who you are," she continued, and she kept her voice flat and factual because this was not the time for anything that could be mistaken for a threat. "I know what you run. I know the docks. I know the arrangements. I know the names above and below you in the structure. I know you have a sit-down with the Bratva twice a year, and I know what happens in a building off Michigan Avenue that you rent through 3 shell companies. I am not telling you this to intimidate you. I am telling you so that you understand that I have not been invisible these past 6 years. I have been watching." Dominic was very still. She had seen men go very still in many different ways. Some men went still because they were afraid, some because they were calculating, some because they were deciding how fast to move and in which direction. Dominic went still, the way a man goes still when he has just been told something that reorganizes every assumption he has made about a situation, and he is intelligent enough to understand that the reorganization is important and he needs to be standing still for it. "You've been watching me," he said. "Not only you," she said. "You were a door. I've been looking for a way to knock on it." "A door to what?" She looked at him for a moment. The cut above his eye was still bleeding steadily. 2 cracked ribs. He needed medical attention, and he needed it soon, but he was the kind of man who would stand here and bleed before he would ask for help, and she knew enough about that particular kind of man to know that you had to give him something worth prioritizing over his pride before he would move. "The Volkov Syndicate," she said. The stillness that followed was different from the one before. It was heavier. The name landed in the air between them the way certain names do with weight and implication, and the specific gravity of something everyone knows but nobody says out loud in certain company. "Say that again," Dominic said quietly. "You heard me the first time." "I heard you," he said. "I want to know that you understand what you just said." I understand exactly what I said, she told him. My husband was Marcus Lawson, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Lawson. He died 6 years ago in a failed extraction mission. The operation was sold. The people who bought it were connected to the Volkov Network Arms Financing Coordination. 4 soldiers died because someone in a comfortable office somewhere decided that the money was worth more than their lives. She paused. One of those soldiers was mine. Dominic said nothing. His expression had shifted into something she could not fully read, which was unusual for her. I have been trying to find the people responsible for 6 years, she continued. Every trail I followed went cold in the same place somewhere in the intersection between the Volkov operation and the Chicago underworld. I am not law enforcement. I have no badge and no jurisdiction and no institution behind me. What I have is 6 years of preparation and tonight in this garage. She met his eyes directly. And now I have you. The silence stretched. Dominic walked slowly toward a nearby car and sat on its hood heavily with the careful movement of a man respecting damaged ribs. He put one hand flat on the metal and looked at the floor for a long moment. You saved my life, he said finally. Yes. To use me. Yes, she said again, because lying to a man like this was not only disrespectful, but strategically useless. I am being honest with you because you are a man who deals in information and you will recognize a lie faster than most people, and because the thing I am asking for is going to require you to trust me, and trust between people like us only starts with honesty. He looked up at her. People like us, he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite amusement but was related to it. People who have been doing hard things for a long time, she said. People who have stopped pretending the world is something it isn't. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, the Volkov operation in Chicago, it's not clean. It's not something I can just point at and hand you. It's embedded in things, connected to people on both sides of lines that I have to live on. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to hand me anything. I'm asking you to open a door. I'll walk through it myself. And if what's on the other side of that door kills you, then I'll have gotten closer than I've gotten in 6 years, she said. And that's worth something. Dominic Santoro looked at her for a long time. She let him look. She was very tired and her shoulder was beginning to make itself impossible to ignore, and there was a man who was going to need emergency medical attention if she didn't start making calls in the next few minutes. But she stood completely still and let Dominic Santoro take whatever time he needed to make whatever decision he was going to make, because this was the moment. This was what 6 years had been building toward. She had planned it differently in her head. She had imagined finding a moment, a quiet moment, a controlled moment, to introduce herself properly to Dominic Santoro and make her case in a measured, logical, professional manner. She had imagined having more leverage ready, more information organized, more time. She had not imagined a parking garage and 5 bodies and an 18-inch steel bar and both of them bleeding under fluorescent lights. But here they were. And the moment was now messy and unplanned and completely real, which was perhaps more fitting than anything she could have orchestrated. My doctor, Dominic said finally, is a man named Reyes. He doesn't ask questions. I'm going to need him in the next hour. He reached into his jacket pocket, moving carefully, telegraphing it, she noted, which was its own kind of courtesy, and produced a phone. After I call him, I'm going to make 2 other calls. One to handle this garage. One to a man who knows the Volkov network better than anyone I trust. He paused. And then you and I are going to sit down somewhere quiet. And you are going to tell me everything. Not the version you've prepared. Everything. She looked at him. Agreed, she said. He nodded a small, precise movement. Then he looked at the phone in his hand and back up at her, and something moved across his face that was too complicated to name. Not gratitude exactly, not the straightforward gratitude of a man whose life has been saved, but something more layered than that. Something that acknowledged the strangeness of what had just happened without trying to reduce it. Hattie, he said. Harriet, she corrected. He almost smiled. Harriet. He said it like he was filing it away in a place where things that mattered went. You want to know something strange? Most things are strange, she said. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 years, he said, I came to that diner because the coffee was bad and the pie was fine and nobody bothered me. And every time I sat down in that booth, I thought that waitress sees more than she lets on. He shook his head slowly. I never followed the thought anywhere. Nobody does, she said. That's how it works. He made his calls. She listened to the portions that were in English and noted the portions that weren't. And while he talked, she moved through the garage efficiently, checking the men she had taken down, making the assessments that needed to be made, reorganizing the space in her mind from a combat environment to a scene that would need to look a certain way when certain people arrived. 2 of the men needed immediate medical attention. She told Dominic this between his calls. He relayed it without asking how she knew. She appreciated that. By the time the first of Dominic's people arrived, a compact, silent man named Vega, who looked at the scene with the expression of someone who had cleaned up worse, Harriet had already organized her assessment of what needed to happen and in what order. She gave Vega the information in the same tone she used to give Tommy orders during a dinner rush. Efficient, sequential, no wasted words. Vega looked at Dominic. Dominic nodded. Vega said, "Yes, ma'am," and got to work. She stepped back. She allowed herself one moment, just one, to lean against the concrete wall and close her eyes and breathe. The shoulder was bad. The cut on her forearm had stopped bleeding but would need to be closed properly. Her feet, which had been hurting before any of this started, had moved past hurting into a kind of numbness that she knew was temporary and ominous. But underneath all of that was something she had not felt in 6 years. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Those were too simple. It was more like the feeling of a door swinging open after you have been pushing against it for longer than you can clearly remember. The release of forward motion after years of resistance. The terrifying, exhilarating realization that the thing you have been working toward is no longer a plan, but a beginning. She pushed off the wall. Dominic was watching her from across the garage. His ribs were bad and his face was a mess, and he was watching her with an attention that she had not seen from him in 6 years of twice-weekly pie. "You're going to be a problem for a lot of people," he said. "I've been a problem for a long time," she said. "I just stopped hiding it." He nodded slowly. "Vega will take us to the house. Reyes will be there in 40 minutes. He paused. "You should know the people you're looking for. The Volkov connection in this city. It goes higher than you think." She looked at him steadily. "How high?" He was quiet for a moment. Just a moment. "High enough," he said, "that the last person who went looking for it didn't come back." She held his gaze. "Then they didn't have the right door," she said. Dominic Santoro said nothing to that. He just turned toward the exit, moving slowly but steadily, the walk of a man in pain who has decided that pain is not a reason to slow down. Harriet followed. Behind her, the garage was already being quietly unmade, Vega and his people moving through it with the efficiency of professionals, the sounds of the diner faint from across the street, the smell of coffee and old grease carrying on the night air like something from a different world. She didn't look back. She had spent 6 years looking back. She was done with that now. The house Vega drove them to was 40 minutes north of the garage, which meant 40 minutes of Dominic Santoro breathing carefully beside her in the back of an armored SUV. And neither of them saying very much, because they were both the kind of people who understood that some conversations needed a room before they could begin. Harriet used the time the way she had always used forced stillness, she assessed. She catalogued. She ran through what had happened in the garage with the dispassionate thoroughness of an after-action review, noting every mistake she had made, every moment where her timing had been a half-second slower than it should have been, every place where 6 years behind a counter had left a gap that training alone couldn't fully close. The shoulder was going to cost her. She had absorbed a hit she should have redirected, and she had absorbed it because her left side had been slower to respond than she had expected, and that slowness was a debt she had accumulated one uneventful shift at a time over 6 years. She would pay it back. She would have to. Dominic said at some point around the 20-minute mark without looking at her, "The ribs aren't broken. I've had broken ribs. These are cracked." "2 of them," she said. "Left side, the second and third." He turned to look at her then. "I counted the impacts," she said simply. He turned back to the window. "Of course you did." Reyes was already at the house when they arrived, a compact, unhurried man in his 50s who looked like somebody's grandfather and moved like somebody's surgeon, which was more or less what he was. He took one look at Dominic and steered him toward a back room without speaking. And Dominic went without argument, which told Harriet more about the state of his ribs than anything he would have admitted out loud. She sat in a chair near the window of a room that was large and quiet and impersonal, in the way of spaces that are used for business rather than living, and she held a cloth against the cut on her forearm and she waited. Waiting had never been her strongest skill. She had always been better at moving than at being still. But she had learned patience the hard way, the way most people learn the things that don't come naturally through repetition and necessity, and the gradual understanding that some things cannot be rushed without being broken. A man appeared in this doorway. Not Vega. Someone she hadn't seen before, older, heavyset, with the kind of face that had been weathered by decades of being careful. He looked at her with an expression that was not hostile, but was not warm, the expression of a man doing a precise professional assessment of something he had not expected to encounter. "You're the waitress," he said. "Among other things," she said. It was becoming a refrain. "Dominic says you handled 6 of Callahan's men." "Dominic is generous," she said. "Declan O'Bannon walked out on his own. I handled 5. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he came fully into the room and sat down across from her, and she understood, without being told, that this was the man Dominic had called, the one who knew the Volkov network. "My name is Farrell," he said. "Frank Farrell. I've been in this city for 31 years, and I know where most of the bodies are buried because I helped bury some of them, and I know who buried the rest. Dominic tells me you're looking for the Volkov connection." "Yes," she said. "He also tells me your husband was Marcus Lawson." Something tightened in her chest. The name in someone else's mouth always did that. Even now, even after 6 years of practice. "Yes," she said again. Farrell looked at her steadily. "I knew about that operation," he said. "Not the details, but I knew it happened. I knew it went wrong." The tightening became something sharper. "How? Because the man who sold it came to Chicago 2 months after," Farrell said. "He came with money and he was looking to park it somewhere quiet, and he came to people I know and people I know came to me." The room was very silent. Harriet kept her face completely still. She had been keeping her face still for 6 years. She was very good at it. But underneath the stillness, something was happening that she hadn't felt in a long time. The specific electricity of a trail that had been cold for so long you had stopped believing it was real, suddenly becoming warm under your hands. "You know who he is," she said. "I knew who he was," Farrell said. "Past tense. He died 14 months ago. Heart attack officially. I have no reason to believe it was anything else." The electricity didn't die. It reconfigured. "He died with the information," she said. Her voice was flat. She was making herself keep it flat. "He died with some of it," Farrell said. "But money doesn't die with the man who carried it. It goes somewhere, it becomes something, and the something it became in this city, that trail still exists if you know where to follow it." She looked at him. "Do you know where to follow it?" "I know where it starts," he said. "What's at the end of it that I don't know? And I'll be honest with you, Harriet Lawson, because Dominic asked me to be, and because I think you're owed it. What's at the end of that trail scares me. And there are not many things left in this world that scare Frank Farrell." She said nothing. "The money from the sale of that operation flowed through 3 accounts before it landed in Chicago," he continued. "We tracked 2 of them. The 3rd account, the one it actually came from, connects to a structure inside the Volkov network that is not arms trafficking. It is not the operation that everybody knows about. It is something else, something that has been running much longer and goes much deeper. And the people who run it have enough reach into enough institutions that the reason nobody has touched it is not incompetence." He paused. "It is choice." He paused. Someone is protecting them," she said. "Multiple someones," he said, "in multiple places. Some of them in buildings with flags outside." She felt the weight of that settle over her. She had suspected it. The failure of 6 years of conventional channels had told her what conventional channels couldn't be trusted to do, but having it confirmed out loud by a man who had no reason to lie to her, and several reasons to be careful about what he said, was a different thing from suspecting it. "Then I don't go through conventional channels," she said. "No," Farrell agreed. "You don't." Dominic came back into the room. He moved better than he had in the garage. Reyes had done something to the ribs, taped them probably enough to make breathing functional, if not comfortable. His face had been cleaned up. He looked like a man who had been in a fight and won, which was not entirely accurate but was close enough. He looked at Farrell. Something passed between them, the wordless communication of men who have known each other long enough that entire conversations have been compressed into expressions. "You told her," Dominic said. "I told her what I know," Farrell said. "Which is the beginning." Dominic sat down. He moved carefully, respecting the ribs, and she noticed that he didn't try to hide the care from her the way he might have hidden it from someone else. That was interesting. That was data. "There is a man," Dominic said, "named Gregor Lantz. He is not Russian. He is Austrian. He has lived in Chicago for 11 years. On paper, he runs an import business, high-end European goods, furniture, art, the kind of things that rich people buy because they have run out of practical things to spend money on. In reality, he is the Volkov Network's primary financial architect in North America. He doesn't move weapons. He doesn't move people. He moves money. He cleans it. He parks it. He grows it. He routes it back. He is the reason the Volkov operation in this country has survived 20 years of federal investigation without a single conviction." Harriet listened without interrupting. She had learned that, too, the discipline of listening completely without organizing a response while someone was still speaking, because the last thing someone said was often the most important thing, and you missed it if you were already building your answer. "Lantz is connected to the account Farrell mentioned," Dominic continued. "Not directly, there are layers between him and the money. There are always layers, but the layers are there because he built them. He knows what they cover." "He knows who sold the operation," she said. "He may know more than that," Dominic said. "He may have been involved in structuring the payment." Farrell nodded once, slowly. "The timing of the money matches what I know about Lantz's operating cycles. He ran a large cleaning operation in that window, the kind of operation you run when you have an unusual amount of cash coming in from an unusual source." The room was very quiet. Harriet sat with the information and let it settle into her understanding, the way she had learned to let complex operational data settle, not trying to force it into a conclusion before the picture was complete, but letting the weight of it find its own shape. 6 years, 4 soldiers. Her husband's face in the last photograph she had taken of him 2 weeks before the mission, standing in their kitchen making coffee and laughing at something she had said, and completely unaware that the world was 23 days away from ending. Gregor Lantz, an Austrian with an import business and 11 years in Chicago, and money that had come from somewhere it should not have come from. She looked at Dominic. "Can you get me close to him?" Dominic and Farrell exchanged the look again. "Getting close to Lantz is not simple," Dominic said carefully. "He is cautious in a way that has kept him alive and free for 20 years. He does not take meetings with people he hasn't vetted. He does not appear at events where he might be seen in the wrong company. He has a private security apparatus that is professional." "How professional?" 4 full-time personnel with military backgrounds, Farrell said. "Rotation schedule, no patterns. The building where his office is located has its own access protocols. His residence is a controlled environment." She thought about it. "He attends things," she said. "A man who runs a legitimate import business attends things. Art events, industry dinners, the kind of public appearances that a respectable businessman cannot avoid without raising questions." "He does," Dominic said. "Then that's the door." "Harriet." Dominic's voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more direct. The voice of a man who was choosing to be honest about something that was costing him something to say. "What happened tonight in the garage that bought you my attention and my respect and a debt I intend to honor. But what you're talking about now is a different order of thing. Getting close to Gregor Lands means entering a world that is very good at identifying people who don't belong in it. I've been invisible my entire adult life, she said. I'm very good at belonging. Not like this, he said. Lands's world it has a texture to it. People know each other. They have histories. A new face requires an explanation, and the explanation has to hold up to people who are professionally suspicious. Then give me a history, she said. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that contains a decision being made. It was Farrell who spoke first. There is a gala, he said. 3 weeks from now. The Chicago International Arts Foundation dinner. Lands sits on the foundation's board. He attends every year. It is one of 6 public events he appears at annually. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks is not much time to build a credible identity in that world, Farrell said. It wasn't a discouragement. It was an assessment. It's enough, she said. Dominic was watching her again with that particular quality of attention she was beginning to recognize as his version of serious interest, the look of a man who had stopped seeing what he expected to see and was trying to accurately understand what was actually in front of him. You'd need clothes, he said. Not just good clothes. The right clothes. The kind that say the right things to the kind of people who read clothes. Yes. A name. A backstory that can survive being looked into. Yes. Someone to vouch for you in the room. Someone Lands's people know and don't have reason to doubt. She looked at him. He looked back at her. I would need you, she said. In the room. Vouching. I know, he said. Is that a problem? He considered it for a moment. Callahan's people will try again before 3 weeks, he said. Tonight was a failure for them, and men like Callahan don't absorb failures quietly. Whatever is coming next will be more careful than 6 men in a parking garage. I know, she said. So you're asking me to manage an active threat against my own organization, while simultaneously building you a legend deep enough to get you inside a room with the most carefully protected financial criminal in the city. Yes, she said. That is what I'm asking. Another silence. Dominic Santoro had the kind of face that didn't give away what was happening behind it until he chose to let it, which was a quality she respected in the specific way you respect something that makes your own job harder. She could not read what he was deciding. She could only wait. Then he said, Farrell, the aldermanic dinner in 2 weeks Kovacs is going. Who else from Lands's circle? Farrell thought for a moment. Brennan, possibly Simonetti. Good. Dominic looked at Harriet. We start smaller. There's an event in 2 weeks. Lower stakes. If you can move in that room without raising questions, we use it as the test. If it holds, we build toward the gala. It was a smarter approach than hers. She acknowledged that internally without needing to say it out loud. 2 weeks to the test, 3 to the target. 5 weeks total with an active threat from Callahan running underneath it the entire time. All right, she said. One more thing, Dominic said. His voice shifted again back to that direct register, the one that was choosing honesty. The last person who got close to Lands's operation in this city, who was looking into the Volkov connection. She remembered what he had said in the garage. The one who didn't come back, she said. Her name was Elena Voss, he said. She was federal. She had been inside for 8 months. She disappeared 19 months ago. No body, no evidence, no case. He paused. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I know, she said. I'm telling you because she was good, he said. By every account, she was very good, and she went in without someone watching her back, without someone who knew the terrain. He looked at her steadily. I am not going to let that happen to you. The statement landed in a way she had not prepared for. Not because it was sentimental. It wasn't sentimental, it was practical. The kind of thing a man says when he is making a commitment that has operational implications. But because it had been a very long time since anyone had said anything to her that contained within it the assumption that her survival was a priority worth organizing around, she had spent 6 years being invisible, not just to other people, to herself. She kept her face still, but something behind her eyes shifted just slightly, just for a moment. Thank you, she said. Quiet, meaning it. Dominic nodded, that small, precise movement again, filing it away. Farrell stood and said he would make calls, and disappeared the way men like Farrell disappeared completely, without residue, as if they had been a thought rather than a person. She and Dominic were alone in the room. "There is something else," she said. "Something I didn't tell you in the garage because there were other priorities." He looked at her. "The operation that killed my husband," she said. "The extraction mission. The 4 soldiers who died." She paused for only a moment. "One of the names on that mission roster was a man named Carter, Daniel Carter. He was regular Army attached to the unit temporarily. He survived the mission. He was the only one who did." And Dominic's voice was careful. "And Daniel Carter retired 18 months after the mission," she said. "He left the service. He moved to Chicago." She held Dominic's gaze. "He has been in this city for 4.5 years, and I have never been able to find out why." The quiet that followed was different from all the other quiets of the night. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was too controlled to be readable, but too present to be nothing. "You think he sold it," he said. "I think he survived when 4 other people didn't," she said. "And I think he came to the city where the money went. And I think that is too many coincidences for a woman who stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago." Dominic was quiet. Then, "I know a Daniel Carter. Not well. He runs security consulting out of a firm on the west side." His voice was very even. "He has done work for people I know." The electricity from before returned doubled. She kept her face still. She kept her voice even. "Tell me about him," she said. "Daniel Carter had a corner office on the 14th floor of a building on West Madison that cost more per square foot than anything a retired Army sergeant running a mid-sized security consulting firm should reasonably have been able to afford. Harriet knew this because she had looked up the lease records 3 years ago during one of the cycles where the trail she was following had briefly warmed before going cold again. She had noted the discrepancy, filed it, and moved on. Because discrepancies without connective tissue were just anomalies, and anomalies without proof were just suspicion, and suspicion without a mechanism to act on. It was just pain wearing a different name. Now she had connective tissue. Dominic told her what he knew about Carter in the measured, careful way of a man who understood that information delivered without context was as dangerous as information withheld. Carter's firm was called Meridian Security Group, 12 employees, all with military or law enforcement backgrounds. Their client list was not public, but the nature of the work, physical security consultation, risk assessment, executive protection, put them in proximity to exactly the kind of people who moved through the overlap between legitimate business and the kind of business that didn't appear on tax returns. Carter himself was quiet, kept a low profile, didn't appear at the kind of events that generated photographs or records. He was, Dominic said, very good at being present without being visible. She heard that description and felt something cold move through her chest. Because she recognized it. She had spent 6 years practicing the same skill for completely different reasons, and hearing it applied to the man she believed had sold her husband's life made her understand in a new and very specific way that she was not the only one in this city who had learned to be invisible on purpose. "Has he done work for you directly?" she asked. "Once," Dominic said. 3 years ago, I needed a security review for a facility that had a specific sensitivity. Someone recommended him. The work was clean, professional, no issues. We haven't had contact since." "Who recommended him?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. "A man named Goss. Arthur Goss. He brokers introductions in this city, legitimate and otherwise. He has a hand in most things that move through the upper end of the private security world." "Is Goss connected to Lands?" "Peripherally," Dominic said. "Everything at that level is peripheral until it isn't." She sat with that. The web she had been trying to map for 6 years was revealing itself to her in a single night, not because she had gotten smarter or more resourceful, but because she had finally forced herself into proximity with a man who held a corner of it. She was aware in a part of her mind that stayed cold and analytical, even when everything else in her was running hot, that this was both an opportunity and a danger. When a web reveals itself quickly, it is sometimes because you have found the right thread. And sometimes it is because something larger is pulling you in. She had to know which this was. "I need to know more about Carter before I move toward him," she said. "If he is connected to the Volkov network through Lons, then approaching him the wrong way will close every door before I reach it. I need to understand what he knows and what he is protecting and whether he is a principal or an instrument." "There's a difference?" Dominic asked. There was no judgment in it. He was genuinely asking. "Yes," she said. "A principal made a decision. An instrument followed an order. Both are responsible, but they require different approaches, and the information they hold is different, and what they're willing to trade it for is different." She paused. "And what they deserve is different. To me personally." Dominic considered that. "You've thought about this for a long time." "Every day for 6 years," she said. "I have had conversations with Daniel Carter in my head several thousand times. I know what I want to say to him. What I don't know yet is whether I want to say it from across a table or from across a room, and that depends on what kind of man he actually turned out to be versus the man I constructed from incomplete information. And if he's worse than you constructed," she looked at Dominic steadily, "then the conversation is shorter." He accepted that without comment, which told her something about Dominic Santoro that she added to what she already knew. The next 10 days moved fast. She did not go back to Richie's. She called Tommy from the car on the way to the house that first night and told him she needed personal time and she didn't know how long and she was sorry for the short notice. Tommy said, "Hattie, are you okay?" in the voice of a man who was genuinely asking and would genuinely worry, and she said, "I will be," which was the most honest answer she had. She stayed in a property Dominic maintained on the north side, clean anonymous, the kind of place that belonged to a holding company that belonged to another holding company, and did not connect to anything that could be traced without significant effort. She slept in a real bed and ate food that wasn't diner food, and spent the first 3 days doing something she hadn't done in 6 years. She trained. Not to get back to where she had been, she was clear-eyed enough to know that 6 years could not be reclaimed in 3 days, but to take inventory, to understand precisely where she was and what she had and what she needed to rebuild, and how fast. The shoulder was the problem. It was worse than she had told Dominic, worse than Reyes had seen because she had been careful about what she showed Reyes. Deeper bruising than surface, possibly involving the joint capsule, the kind of injury that with rest and treatment would heal in 3 to 4 weeks, but with continued activity would compound. She did not have 3 to 4 weeks. She managed it. She had been managing pain since long before the diner. She knew the difference between pain that was information and pain that was noise, and she had learned to turn the volume down on the noise while remaining alert to the information. On the 4th day, Farrell came to her with a package. The package contained a life. Not hers, a constructed one built with the specific precision that Farrell apparently brought to everything. The name was Catherine Marsh. The backstory was a woman from Boston, old money with newer losses, a recently divorced art consultant who had relocated to Chicago 6 months ago and was navigating the city's philanthropic circles with the particular combination of pedigree and discretion that opened doors at the level where Gregor Lands operated. "The divorce is real," Farrell said, setting the package on the table in front of her. "It belongs to a woman who agreed to let certain professional details about her life be borrowed in exchange for the kind of assistance that Dominic was in a position to provide. She knows what it's for. She knows enough to not ask more than she needs to." Harriet looked through the package. Driver's license, credit history, professional references, the kind of supporting architecture that a background check would find and a suspicious mind would look for. It was good work. The kind of work that took time and connections and a very specific knowledge of how people who didn't trust easily went about verifying the things they needed to verify. "The aldermanic dinner is in 4 days, Farrell said. "Dominic will be there. You will arrive separately already in the room when he arrives, which means the introduction will appear accidental rather than arranged. Brennan will be there. He's one of Lands's outer circle. If you make an impression on Brennan, it will travel back." "What do I need to know about Brennan?" "He collects things," Farrell said. "Art wine information. He values novelty. New people with interesting histories are interesting to him, which works in your favor. He is also vain about his knowledge of mid-century European furniture, so if that comes up—" "Nakashima," she said, "though technically Japanese-American. If he brings up European mid-century, the safe points of entry are Ponte and Prouvé, and if he's showing off, he'll mention Periand." Farrell looked at her. "I have been preparing for a room like this for a long time," she said. "I didn't know when I would need it. I prepared anyway." Farrell was quiet for a moment. Then, "The woman who walks into that dinner cannot look like someone who has been preparing for it. She has to look like someone who arrived in it naturally, the way people who have always lived in those rooms arrive without effort, without agenda, without anything that resembles the specific alertness of someone who is working." "I know," she said. "I've been invisible my whole adult life. I know how to look like I belong somewhere I don't. I know how to make people feel like the room got better when I walked in without making them feel like I'm trying to make them feel that way." "That's a complicated sentence," Farrell said. "It's a complicated skill," she said. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man recalibrating. "Yes," he said finally, "I believe it is." 3 days before the dinner, Dominic called her into a meeting that she had not been expecting. Vega drove her to a restaurant that was closed for the afternoon, a private room in the back, the kind of room that existed in exactly the kind of restaurants that had private rooms in the back where the walls were thick and the staff understood the value of short memories. Dominic was there, Farrell was there, and there was a third person, a woman she had not met before, seated with the particular stillness of someone who had made a professional study of being unreadable. "This is Kovacs," Dominic said. "Mara Kovacs. She works independently. She has been tracking the Volkov Network's Chicago operations for the past 2 years." Harriet looked at Kovacs. Kovacs looked back at her with the direct assessing look of one professional taking the measure of another. "You're the one from the garage," Kovacs said. "Yes. I've been trying to get to Lens for 8 months, Kovacs said. "I got close enough twice to understand how close was still not close enough, and both times something happened that told me the network had visibility I hadn't accounted for." She paused. "The third time I try, I need it to work." "What do you bring?" Harriet asked. "Blunt." There was no time for anything else. "Inside information on Lanz's security rotation," Kovacs said. "I know his protocols. I know how he verifies new contacts. I know the specific questions his people ask about backgrounds and where they look for the answers." She leaned forward slightly. "And I know what Elena Voss found before she disappeared." The name landed in the room the way it had landed when Dominic first said it with weight. "She made contact," Kovacs said. "Before the end. She sent one message to someone she trusted, and the message contained 3 words that made no sense at the time. They make sense now." She held the silence for exactly 1 beat. The words were "Carter controls access." The cold that moved through Harriet this time was not the cold of a trail warming. It was the cold of a locked room finally opening and finding that what was on the other side of the door was worse than anything she had built in her head to prepare herself for it. Carter controls access. Daniel Carter, the man who had survived the mission that killed Marcus and 3 others, the man who had come to Chicago and built a quiet, unremarkable security consulting firm and kept himself invisible for 4.5 years, the man who Dominic had used once for a job and found clean and professional. He wasn't just connected to the Volkov network. He was a gatekeeper for it. She understood with the cold precision of a mind trained to process tactical information without flinching what that meant. It meant that every approach to Lens passed through architecture that Carter had helped build. It meant that the security protocols around Gregor Lens were not just managed by professionals with military backgrounds. They were managed by a man who had been trained by the same institutions that had trained her, who understood the same methods, who knew the same vulnerabilities. It meant that getting to Lens meant getting past Carter. And Carter, if he was who she now believed him to be, would recognize tradecraft when he saw it. "He'll know," she said. "He might," Kovacs said, "if you come at it the way anyone else would come at it. But there is something Carter does not know." She looked at Harriet steadily. "He doesn't know you exist. He doesn't know that the wife of the man he sold knew to come looking, or that she spent 6 years getting herself into position to be in this city at this level at this time. He has been careful about many things. He was not careful about you because he didn't know to be." "That's the window," Harriet said. "That's the window," Kovacs agreed. "And it is small, and it will close the moment he has reason to look at you. And if it closes before you have what you need, there won't be another one." Harriet looked at Dominic. He was watching her with an expression that for the first time since the garage she could not fully contain in the category of professional assessment. There was something in it that was more personal than that. The look of a man who had made a commitment and was checking privately whether the commitment was going to cost more than he had calculated. She looked back at Kovacs. What was the rest of Voss's message? Kovacs was quiet for a moment. There wasn't a rest, she said. That was all she sent. 3 words. And then she was gone. The room absorbed that. Harriet sat with the specific weight of a woman who had been given information that was both the most useful thing anyone had told her in 6 years, and a reminder that the road ahead of her had a defined and documented cost. Elena Voss had been good. Voss had gotten close. And Voss had sent 3 words and then disappeared. She did not let herself feel it fully. She allowed herself exactly the amount of feeling that was honest and no more a brief, genuine acknowledgement of Elena Voss as a person who had gone into the dark for the right reasons and had not come back out. Then she filed it. Not away, not somewhere she couldn't reach it, but behind what needed to happen next. The dinner is in 3 days, she said. Yes, Farrell said. Brennan will be there. I make an impression. The impression travels back to Lanz's circle. She was thinking out loud, and they all knew it, and none of them interrupted. Carter's people will check the Catherine Marsh background when the name surfaces. The background holds. In the 3 weeks between the dinner and the gala, I build enough surface-level credibility in that world that my presence at the gala is unremarkable. That's the plan, Dominic said. And Carter, she said. Is he at the gala? Silence. He attends, Kovacs said. Not as a guest. He manages Lanz's security detail during the event. He will be in the room. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very calmly, Good. Dominic looked at her. Good. I've been waiting 6 years to be in the same room with him, she said. I'd rather it be on my terms than his. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Not concern exactly, Dominic was too careful a man to let concern show his concern, but an awareness. The awareness of a man who had agreed to open a door and was now watching clearly the thing that intended to walk through it. There is one more thing you need to know before that room, he said. He said it carefully, with the specific weight of something he had been holding back, waiting for the right moment. She looked at him. Carter's firm, he said. Meridian Security. The client list I told you wasn't public. Yes. I had Farrell look at it more carefully this week, Dominic said. With the right access, the right questions. He paused. One of the clients routed through 2 intermediaries is a federal contractor, Counterintelligence Consulting. The contract has been active for 3 years. She went very still. Carter isn't just working for the Volkov network, she said. He is also, Dominic said quietly and precisely, working for someone in the federal government. Someone who is paying him to consult on the very investigation that is supposed to be targeting the network he works for. The room was so quiet she could hear herself breathe. Carter controls access, not just to Lanz, to the investigation itself. Elena Voss had not disappeared because the Volkov network had found her. Elena Voss had disappeared because Daniel Carter had found her first and told someone who needed to know. Harriet sat with this for as long as she could afford to sit with it. Then she looked up at the 3 people in the room, Dominic, with his damaged ribs and his unreadable face, Farrell, with his 31 years of careful knowledge, Kovacs, with her 8 months of close and not close enough. All right, she said. Her voice was even, completely even. Then we do this differently. Differently meant 3 things. And Harriet laid them out in the restaurant's back room with the same efficiency she had used to organize the garage cleanup 11 days ago, sequentially without waste, with the specific clarity of a person who has moved past fear into the territory on the other side of it, where everything becomes very simple because the cost of failure has already been accepted. First, the aldermanic dinner in 3 days was no longer a test. It was an operation. She would not be there to make an impression on Brennan and let it travel. She would be there to make an impression on Brennan and control exactly where it traveled and what it said when it arrived. Second, Daniel Carter could not be allowed to run his surveillance on the federal investigation unchecked while she built toward the gala. If he was feeding information about active inquiries back to the network, then every move she made inside that world had to assume that someone was watching the watchers. Which meant Kovach's inside information about Lanz's security protocols was valuable only if Carter had not already updated those protocols in response to something he had seen in the investigation files. Third, she needed to know who Carter's federal contact was, not eventually, before the gala. Because walking into a room where Gregor Lanz and Daniel Carter were both present without knowing who in the broader institutional structure was protecting them was not an operation. It was a sacrifice. She was not interested in being a sacrifice. Kovach said, "The federal contact, do you have a direction?" "Not yet," Harriet said. "But Carter has been running this for 3 years. A contract like that leaves a shape even when it doesn't leave a name. Payments meeting patterns the specific way information moves from an investigation to the people it's supposed to be targeting." She looked at Farrell. "You said you have contacts in the federal space." "Peripheral ones," Farrell said carefully. "I don't need central ones," she said. "I need someone who pays attention to what doesn't add up. Someone who noticed that Voss's disappearance closed a case instead of opening one." Farrell was quiet for a moment. The quiet of a man deciding something. "There is a woman," he said finally. "She is retired now. 30 years with the Bureau. She left under circumstances that were not fully explained. She noticed things that other people preferred she hadn't noticed, and when she continued to notice them, the situation was resolved by removing her from it." "She was pushed out," Harriet said. "She was managed out," Farrell said, "which in that world is the same thing with better paperwork." "Will she talk to me?" "She might talk to you," Farrell said. "She will not talk to anyone connected to Dominic. That connection would end the conversation before it started." Harriet understood. She looked at Dominic. "I go alone." He didn't like it. She could see that not in any dramatic expression, just in the small stillness that came over him when he was receiving information that conflicted with a decision he had already made. He had told her in this same restaurant 2 days ago that he was not going to let what happened to Voss happen to her, and she respected that commitment, and she was asking him to partially stand down from it. "Vega can be outside," he said. "Vega can be a block away," she said. "No closer." He considered it for 3 seconds. "Agreed." She met Farrell's contact the following afternoon. The woman's name was Ruth Callender, and she lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood on the northwest side, the kind of house that belonged to a person who had spent a career in an institution and was now living entirely outside of it, in a space so far from the world she had occupied that the distance was probably the point. She answered the door before Harriet knocked, which told Harriet that she had been watching from inside, which told her that retirement had not removed Ruth Callender's instincts, only her context for using them. She was in her late 60s, sharp-boned with eyes that had the specific quality of someone who has spent decades looking for the thing behind the thing and can no longer turn that off, even when nothing in her immediate environment requires it. She looked at Harriet the way Harriet was used to people looking at her, but she was the first person in a very long time whose look went past the surface and found something. "Farrell said you were a soldier," Ruth said, stepping back from the door to let her in. "I was," Harriet said. "He said your husband died in a burned operation." "Yes. He said you've been looking into it for 6 years and that you've recently found a thread that connects to a name I might recognize." "Daniel Carter," Harriet said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen, and Harriet followed, understanding that this was not a refusal, but an invitation to continue in a room where Ruth felt more in control of the space. Ruth put water on and stood with her back to the stove and looked at Harriet with an expression that was not quite pain and not quite recognition, but was related to both. "I know that name," she said. "I know you do," Harriet said. "How?" "Because Elena Voss's last message said Carter controls access, and the person she sent it to forwarded it to someone who eventually connected it to a case file that had your name on it," Harriet said. "You were looking at the Volkov network 3 years before Voss was assigned to it. Your investigation was closed. The closure report cited insufficient evidence." Ruth was very still. "The closure was not yours," Harriet said. It was not a question. "No," Ruth said quietly. "It was not mine." "Then whose?" Ruth looked at her for a long moment. The water behind her began to heat. She didn't move. "There is a man named Aldrich," she said. "Paul Aldrich. He holds a position in the counterintelligence division that carries more operational authority than its official title suggests. He has held that position for 9 years. He is considered by most people who know his name, which is not most people, to be exceptionally good at his job." "He shut your investigation down," Harriet said. "He had it transferred," Ruth said, "which is the cleaner version of shutting it down because a transferred investigation still technically exists, and an investigation that technically exists cannot be the subject of a complaint about being improperly closed." She paused. "The investigation was transferred to a unit that had no existing expertise in financial trafficking networks assigned to 2 analysts who were already carrying twice their manageable caseload, and has not produced a single significant action in the 3 years since." "And Carter's contract," Harriet said. "The federal consulting contract, counterintelligence." Ruth's expression shifted. Something that was partly professional confirmation and partly a more personal kind of recognition. The recognition of someone hearing for the first time from someone outside her own head the thing she had been unable to prove and unable to stop thinking about. "Aldrich manages Carter's contract," she said. There it was, the complete shape of it finally visible. Aldrich protected the investigation from producing results. Carter fed Aldrich information from inside the network that told them when to move, when to hold, when to remove someone who had gotten too close. Lanz ran the financial architecture. The Volkov network moved freely through a city where the investigation tasked with stopping it was being managed by one of its own assets. Elena Voss had found Carter. Carter had told Aldrich. Aldrich had arranged the rest. "He's in Washington," Harriet said. "His primary office is," Ruth said. "He comes to Chicago 3 or 4 times a year, always in connection with a site review or a field office consultation, nothing that generates attention. He was here last month." "Will he be here for the gala?" Ruth looked at her. "You know about the gala." "I'm going to be there," Harriet said. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. She turned to the stove and poured water and brought 2 cups to the table and sat down with the careful movement of a woman whose body had accumulated years she had not been gentle with. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked across the table at Harriet with an expression that was finally and completely unguarded. "I spent 3 years trying to prove what you just laid out for me in 10 minutes, Ruth said. "I couldn't touch it. Every time I got close enough to reach the ground shifted. It was like trying to put your hands around smoke." "You were working through official channels," Harriet said. "The channel was compromised." "Yes," Ruth said. "I know that now. I think I knew it then toward the end. But knowing it and being able to do something about it are 2 different things, when the tools you have access to are the same tools the other side is monitoring." "I'm not using official channels," Harriet said. Ruth looked at her, really looked at her, taking in what she was, what she represented, what the presence of a woman like this at her kitchen table on an ordinary afternoon meant about the state of everything. "No," Ruth said quietly, "I can see that." "I need one thing from you," Harriet said. "One thing that you have and I don't. Documentation. Whatever you kept, whatever you held back from the transfer, whatever you copied or photographed or retained in a form that doesn't exist in any official file. I need to know what it says and where it is." The silence that followed was the longest one since Harriet had walked into the house. Ruth looked into her cup. She looked at her hands. She looked at a point on the table between them that wasn't anything specific, just a place her eyes could rest while the rest of her worked through something that was clearly not simple. "If I give you what I have," she said, not looking up, "and you do what I think you're going to do with it, the chain of possession breaks. Whatever case could theoretically be built on that documentation becomes difficult to use in any formal proceeding." "I know," Harriet said. "You don't care about a formal proceeding," Ruth said. "I care about the truth," Harriet said. "I care about the names. I care about what actually happened and who made it happen and whether the people responsible are still making things happen to other people right now." She paused. "The formal proceeding, that's for someone else after. What I need is to know with certainty what I'm walking into that room with." Ruth finally looked up. Her eyes were clear. Whatever she had been working through, she had come out the other side of it. "I kept everything," she said. "Everything I could copy without triggering a flag. It's in a form that's been sitting in a deposit box for 2 years because I couldn't find anyone I trusted enough to give it to, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy it." She held Harriet's gaze. "It connects Aldrich to Carter. It connects Carter to 3 payments that correlate to the timeline of your husband's operation. It does not prove the sale directly, but it establishes a pattern that makes the sale the only logical explanation for the pattern." Harriet was very still. "I'll get you the access information for the deposit box," Ruth said. "Tonight if you can wait." "I can wait," Harriet said. She waited. She drank the tea Ruth made, which was strong and slightly bitter, and she sat in the quiet of a house that belonged to a woman who had been removed from her life's work for being right, and she thought about Marcus. She let herself think about him fully in a way she rarely allowed, not the shape of his absence, not the grief, but the actual man. His voice, the way he said her name, the way he had looked at her in that last photograph laughing in their kitchen, entirely unaware of what was 23 days away. She thought about what he would say to her right now if he could. He would not say be careful. He had known her too long and loved her too well to waste time on things she already knew. He would not say, "I'm proud of you," because Marcus had never spoken about her capabilities in terms of pride. He had simply accepted them as facts, the way you accept gravity as a fact without ceremony. He would say, "Finish it," and she was going to. Ruth gave her the deposit box information at 7:30. Harriet was at the box by 8:45. She sat in the car outside the Bank Vega 2 blocks away, per their agreement, and read through everything Ruth had kept, and by 9:15 she had confirmed what Ruth had told her, and found 3 things Ruth hadn't mentioned either because she hadn't realized their significance, or because she had wanted Harriet to find them herself. The first was a communication record, indirect, routed through 2 intermediaries, but traceable, that placed Aldrich in contact with Arthur Goss, Dominic's broker, 18 months ago, which meant Aldrich knew about Dominic, which meant the connection between Harriet and Dominic, if Carter was watching, created a risk she had not fully calculated. The second was a name she didn't recognize, Mireille Fontaine. It appeared 3 times in Ruth's documentation without explanation, just the name attached to financial transfers that ran parallel to Carter's payment timeline. The third was a date, 3 weeks from now, the same date as the gala. Next to the date in Ruth's handwriting, asset review, scheduled Aldrich, Chicago. Aldrich was going to be at the gala. She sat with this for a full minute. Just sat with it in the dark of the car with the documentation on her lap and the weight of 5 weeks of convergence settling into a shape she could finally see completely. Every thread she had followed Marcus Carter Lansvoss Aldrich came to the same room on the same night 3 weeks from now. She called Dominic. He answered on the second ring, which told her he had been awake and waiting, which told her something about Dominic Santoro that she added to everything else she knew about him. "Aldrich will be at the gala," she said. Silence for 3 seconds. "How certain are you?" he said. "Certain enough to plan around it," she said. "I need to change the approach. Not the surface. The surface stays the same. Catherine Marsh attends, makes the right impressions. But underneath it, the objective expands." "To include Aldrich." "To include Aldrich," she confirmed. "I can't go into that room with Lands and Carter and an active federal counterintelligence officer without a contingency that accounts for all 3 simultaneously. If any one of them makes me before I'm ready, the other 2 are warned." "So you need all 3 neutralized in the same window," Dominic said. "I need all 3 accountable in the same window," she said. "There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "The Mireille Fontaine name, do you want me to look at it?" She had not mentioned it on the call. She stopped. "How do you know that name?" The silence that followed was 3 seconds long and said something she had not anticipated. "Dominic," she said. Her voice was completely even. "She is someone I know," he said. "Peripherally. She moves in Lanz's circle. She has for years. I didn't connect her to any of this because I didn't know what I was looking for." He paused. "I'm connecting it now." "Who is she?" "She is," Dominic said carefully, "the woman who introduced Gregor Lanz to Chicago, 11 years ago. She brought him here, vouched for him, established his first connections in this city. Another pause. She is also, as of 3 months ago, engaged to a sitting federal judge. Harriet closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. A financial architect, protected by a compromised federal officer, managed by a federal asset, and introduced to the city by a woman connected to the judiciary. A network so embedded in the legitimate structure of Chicago that removing it was not a matter of reaching in and pulling a thread. It was a matter of understanding that the thread and the fabric had become the same thing. This was what Farrell had meant when he said it went higher than she thought. This was what had kept it standing for 20 years. She thought about walking back into Richie's diner. She thought about the blue uniform and the cracked vinyl and the coffee that was never quite right and the years of being invisible and the breaker bar and the parking garage and Marcus laughing in the kitchen. She thought about what it meant to stop hiding. "I need 3 weeks," she said. "I need everything you have on Fontaine. I need Kovach's security protocol information verified against what Carter might have updated in the past month. I need Farrell to quietly establish whether Ruth Callender's documentation can be moved into a position where it becomes available to someone after the gala, someone clean, someone outside Aldrich's reach, regardless of what happens to me inside it." "Regardless of what happens to you," Dominic repeated. "Not a question, not quite." "I am not planning to not come back," she said. "But I planned for that before, and plans change, and I would rather have the contingency exist than need it and not have it." "I'll make sure it exists," he said. "Thank you." "Harriet." His voice shifted that personal register again, the one he used when he was choosing to say the thing rather than the professional version of the thing. "What you found tonight, the full shape of it. How are you?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I am," she said, "the clearest I have been in 6 years, the angrier and the clearer. And I have learned that those two things in the right person are not a contradiction." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No," he said, "I don't imagine they are." She drove back through the city Vega, a comfortable distance behind the lights of Chicago, moving past the windows in the way they always did, indifferent and bright and completely unaware of what was moving through them. She had spent 6 years being invisible in this city. She had served its people coffee and cherry pie and absorbed its noise and let it look through her, and she had kept her face still and her hands steady and waited. She was done waiting. In 3 weeks, Harriet Lawson, Chief Warrant Officer, Close Quarters Combat Instructor, Widow Waitress, and the most dangerous invisible woman in the city of Chicago, was going to walk into a room full of the people who had taken everything from her. She was going to be wearing the right clothes and carrying the right name, and she was going to be completely, perfectly invisible, right up until the moment she chose not to be. And when that moment came as it had come in the parking garage on a cold Tuesday night that had changed the shape of everything she was going to be, exactly what 6 years of grief and patience and preparation had made her. Not a victim, not a widow, not a woman that a city had looked through for 6 years without seeing, a weapon that had finally and completely decided to stop being buried. The war had not started in the parking garage. The parking garage had been the first shot, the single detonation that breaks a long silence and tells everyone within range that the quiet they had grown comfortable in was always going to end this way. The war started now, and this time the people who had made the mistake of underestimating Harriet Lawson were not going to get a second chance to correct it.